The morning I decided to sign over the cottage to my daughter, a man I had never seen before knocked on my door and told me I would regret it for the rest of my life. I almost didn't answer. It was barely past 7, the kind of grey autumn morning where the world feels like it hasn't fully committed to waking up yet. The fog sat low over the meadow behind the house, and I was standing in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, watching the light try to break through, thinking about legacies and mistakes and all the things we leave behind when we're gone. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps, deliberate, the kind of knock that doesn't apologize for itself. The man on my porch was somewhere in his mid-50s, lean in the way that suggested a hard life rather than discipline, with grey at his temples and eyes the colour of Winter Creek water, pale, flat and watchful. He wore a canvas jacket with the collar turned up and held a manila envelope against his chest like a shield. "You're Daniel Hargrove," he said. "I am," I replied. "Then we need to talk before you do something you can't undo." "My name is Daniel Hargrove. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county, raised 2 children mostly alone after my wife Patricia passed from cancer when the kids were still in elementary school, and for the last decade I've been living semi-retired in the same house where I grew up, a 3-bedroom craftsman on 4 acres outside of Millbrook, Tennessee. The cottage sits about 200 yards behind the main house, separated by an old stone path and a line of white birch trees my grandfather planted in 1952. The cottage is nothing grand, 800 square feet, a stone fireplace, 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that has needed updating since roughly the Clinton administration. But it was where my mother spent her last years, where my father wrote 3 unpublished novels in longhand at a wooden desk that's still there by the window, and where my daughter Nora had spent every summer of her childhood chasing fireflies and learning to cook on that ancient gas range. It carries the kind of weight that square footage can't measure. Nora was 31 now, freshly divorced and rebuilding. She'd left a difficult marriage. I won't call Marcus names here, but I will say that the divorce was not her idea and the circumstances were not kind, and she was starting over with her 7-year-old son, my grandson Eli, in a rented apartment 40 minutes away. When she mentioned, quietly and without expectation, that she sometimes missed the cottage and wondered if it was sitting empty, something moved in my chest the way foundations shift before you notice there's a problem. I had already made up my mind. The cottage would go to Nora. I'd spoken to my attorney, the paperwork was being prepared, and I'd planned to tell her that Sunday over dinner. It felt right. It felt, honestly, like the clearest decision I'd made in years. Then the stranger knocked. His name, he told me, was Raymond Carr. He said it flatly, the way someone says a name they've said too many times, as if the syllables had worn smooth from repetition. I invited him in because it was cold, and because something in his manner suggested that turning him away would only delay an inevitable conversation, not prevent it. He sat at my kitchen table without being asked and set the envelope down between us. He didn't take coffee. He didn't look around the room with the curiosity of someone seeing it for the first time. He looked directly at me. "I know about the transfer," he said. "The deed, your daughter." I set my mug down slowly. "How?" "That's not the part that matters right now." "It matters quite a bit to me," I said. My voice was even, but my pulse had climbed. I'm not a man who frightens easily, but something about the way he said your daughter, just slightly too deliberate, like a key being inserted carefully into a lock, made the hair on my arms rise. "I'm not here to threaten you," Raymond said, reading something in my face. "I need you to understand that before I show you what's in this envelope, I don't want anything from you. I'm not asking for money. I came here because you deserve to know the truth, and because nobody else is going to tell you." "The truth about what?" He slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, printed on plain paper, slightly grainy, the kind of images pulled from a phone or a low-resolution camera. The first one stopped me completely. It was Nora, sitting at a table in what looked like a restaurant I didn't recognize, upscale, candlelit, clearly not local. Across from her was a man in a dark suit. They were leaning toward each other in the way that people lean when the conversation is too important for distance. His hand was on the table near hers. The man was Marcus, my daughter's ex-husband. I looked up at Raymond. He waited. I looked back down at the photograph. The timestamp in the corner read 11 days ago. "They're in contact," I said. It came out flat, robbed of the emotion I was still processing. "More than contact," Raymond said. "I've been watching Marcus Vale for 8 months. I'm a private investigator. I was hired by his business partner, a man named Gordon Hess, because there were concerns about where certain money was going. Marcus is under investigation for financial fraud, wire fraud specifically. His accounts have been frozen by court order, and there's a judgment pending against him that will likely exceed $1 million. I sat with this for a moment, and Nora. Your daughter reached back out to Marcus approximately 6 weeks ago. I can't tell you what's in her heart, I won't pretend to know that, but what I can tell you is that Marcus Vale has been telling people, his attorney, his associates, that he has a solution to his asset problem, something coming, a property he'll have access to soon. The kitchen felt very small suddenly. You think he knows about the cottage, I said. I think he was told, Raymond said quietly. I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think it matters. My first instinct was not anger at Nora. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories go, the father betrayed, the daughter cast as villain. That's not what moved through me. What I felt first was grief. A deep, slow-moving grief, the kind that knows it's going to stay for a while. Because the story I'd been telling myself about Nora rebuilding, Nora starting fresh, Nora finally free of a man who had diminished her, that story now had a shadow over it. And I didn't know yet what the shadow meant. I asked Raymond how he'd found me. He told me that in tracing Marcus's communications, my name had come up. A conversation Marcus had with his attorney, recorded legally in the context of the fraud investigation, in which Marcus mentioned that his former father-in-law was planning to deed a property to his ex-wife. Raymond had driven 3 hours to find me. He said he didn't have to. He said he debated it for 2 weeks. I have a daughter, he said, as if that explained it, and somehow it did. I thanked him. He left the envelope. He was gone before 8 o'clock. I did not call Nora that day. I sat with what I knew and what I didn't know, which is a discipline I had to learn the hard way over the course of a life. Jumping to conclusions is a young man's habit. At 63, I've earned the patience to let things breathe. What I knew, Marcus was in serious legal and financial trouble. Nora had seen him recently. Marcus had made comments suggesting he expected access to a property. What I didn't know, whether Nora was aware of his legal situation, whether their meeting was innocent, a co-parenting conversation, a custody matter, a moment of weakness, whether Nora had said anything to Marcus about the cottage, or whether Marcus had learned about it through other channels. The difference between those possibilities was the difference between a daughter who was being manipulated and a daughter who was doing the manipulating. And until I knew which I was dealing with, I was not going to make a move that couldn't be undone. I called my attorney, Helen Marsh, and asked her to pause the paperwork. No explanation, she didn't press me. Then I called my son. My son Thomas is 38, lives in Nashville, works in financial compliance, which I recognized in that moment as either a coincidence or a gift from the universe. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Dad, he said finally, I know about Marcus. I gripped the phone. How? Nora told me a month ago. She called me upset. She said Marcus had reached out saying he was in trouble, that he needed help, that he still loved her. She told me she didn't know what to do. He paused. She didn't ask me to keep it from you. I didn't want to worry you. Does she know about the fraud? I don't think so, not the full extent. He told her it was a business dispute. You know how he talks, Dad. He makes everything sound like someone else's problem, someone else's fault. I exhaled slowly. Did she mention the cottage? Silence. Thomas. She might have, he said carefully. She was emotional. She was talking about wanting to give Eli stability, a real place to call home. I think she may have mentioned that you were considering. All right, I said, all right. I drove to Nora's apartment 2 days later, unannounced. I brought Eli a book about birds that I'd had since I was a boy, because that's the kind of grandfather I try to be, the kind who shows up with something that lasts. Eli was delighted. He took the book to his room immediately, which left Nora and me alone in her small kitchen that smelled of coffee and dish soap and the particular specific exhaustion of single parenthood. She knew something was coming. Nora has always been able to read me from the time she was small. She gets it from her mother. I didn't show her the photographs. I didn't mention Raymond Carr. What I did was ask her, directly and without performance, to tell me about Marcus. She cried, not the defensive crying of someone caught, but the exhausted crying of someone who has been carrying something heavy and alone for too long. She told me he had contacted her. She told me she had met him once at a restaurant, yes, the one in the photograph, because she thought she owed it to Eli to at least hear his father out. She told me he had seemed different. Scared, she said. For the first time in their relationship, she had seen him scared. He asked if you were giving me anything, she said, wiping her eyes. Property or money. I told him about the cottage. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have. It wasn't mine to tell. She looked at me. Dad, what's happening? What is this about? So I told her all of it. I will tell you what I saw on my daughter's face when I explained what Marcus was facing, what Raymond had told me, and what Marcus had apparently been saying to his associates. First shock, then confusion, then something that hardened slowly into an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself, years ago, in the weeks after Patricia died, that look of someone whose understanding of the world has just been quietly rearranged, who is taking inventory of every assumption they ever made and finding many of them missing. He was going to take it, she said. It wasn't a question. I don't know exactly what his plan was, I said, but I know he saw it as a solution. He used me, she said. He called me. He said he still loved me. He made me feel, she stopped, pressed her fingers to her mouth. He made me feel like maybe I'd been wrong about things, like maybe the marriage hadn't been, she shook her head, and the whole time he was just. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Here is what happened next, and this is the part that I want you to hold on to. Nora did not fall apart. She had every right to. Instead, she picked up her phone, called Marcus directly, and in a conversation that lasted 14 minutes, I sat 3 feet away because she asked me to stay. She told him that she knew everything, that the cottage was not available, that he was not to contact her again except through attorneys regarding Eli's visitation, and that she hoped, genuinely hoped, he found a way to face what he'd done with something resembling honesty. He tried to talk his way out of it. I could hear the murmur of his voice through the phone. She was immovable. She hung up and set the phone face down on the table and looked at me. I want to be angry, she said. I think the anger is coming, but right now I mostly just feel stupid. You're not stupid, I said. You're someone who wanted to believe that people could change. That's not stupidity. That's just having a heart. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I held her the way I'd held her when she was small and the world had been cruel, which it is, sometimes, and which we survive if we're lucky together. I called Raymond Carr that evening. I wanted to thank him properly, with full information, meaning I now understood why he'd come, and I wanted him to know the outcome. He picked up on the second ring. I told him Nora had not been complicit. I told him she'd confronted Marcus. I told him the deed transfer would be moving forward. He was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. Why'd you really come? I asked. You could have filed your report and moved on. This wasn't part of your job. There was a pause. 8 years ago, he said slowly, my father deeded a property to my brother. My brother was being manipulated by a woman who was already planning to leverage it in a lawsuit. Nobody warned my father. The property was tied up in litigation for 4 years, and my father died before it was resolved. His voice was steady but had a weight behind it. I thought about him when I found your name. I didn't have words for that, so I didn't try to find them. Some things deserve silence. Is your brother all right now? I finally asked. He is. It took time, but he is. Thank you, Raymond, I said. Take care of your daughter, he said, and he hung up. The deed was signed on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks later. Nora stood in Helen Marsh's office with Eli sitting in the corner chair, eating a granola bar, and occasionally offering updates on the birds he'd identified that week from my old book. The look on Nora's face when Helen slid the document across the desk was the same look she'd had at 7 years old on Christmas morning, that particular expression of disbelief tipping slowly into joy, as if the heart is double-checking whether it's allowed to feel this good. Dad, she said, are you sure? I've been sure for months, I said. The path to getting here was complicated, but the destination was never in doubt. She hugged me for a long time. Eli hugged me too, mostly because the energy in the room told him he should, and then went back to his granola bar. Marcus Vale, I'm told, accepted a plea arrangement in February. I know this not because I followed the case closely, but because Thomas mentioned it in passing, the way you mention weather. The settlement involved repayment and community service. His law license, he was a real estate attorney, which carries a particular bitter irony, was suspended. Nora moved into the cottage in early December. She repainted the kitchen a shade of blue-green that I thought was alarming at first, and now find I quite like. Eli adopted a 3-legged dog named Biscuit, who has absolutely no awareness of or concern for his physical limitation. The wooden desk by the window, my father's desk, now has Eli's drawings taped above it, crayon birds and crayon suns, and one large crayon portrait of Biscuit that is, honestly, a better likeness than you'd expect from a 7-year-old. I have dinner there on Sundays. We eat at the table my grandmother bought at an estate sale in 1967, which still wobbles slightly on the left side, which I have been meaning to fix for the better part of my life, and which I now suspect I will never fix, because some things are just part of the furniture of who we are. The stranger who knocked on my door on a grey October morning saved something I didn't know was in danger. Not the cottage, though yes, certainly the cottage. He saved something more fragile than property. He saved the story I was trying to give my daughter, a clean start, a place of her own, a piece of something that had always meant love in our family. He saved it from being tainted, from being entangled, from carrying the shadow of a man who had already taken too much from her. I think about the version of events where I don't answer the door, where I assume the knock is a neighbour or a delivery and decide not to bother, where the paperwork goes through, the deed is signed, and the cottage lands in Nora's name with a lien attached to it before winter, courtesy of a court judgment against a man who had calculated her trust like an asset. I answer the door in every version I can imagine, every time. There is a version of wisdom that says, trust no one, question everything, keep your property close and your family at arm's length. I understand that version. I've lived long enough to understand where it comes from. But here is the version I believe in, after 63 years after loss, after a woman named Patricia who made everything make sense, and then left too soon, after 2 children raised in grief and ordinary grace, after a stranger with an envelope who drove 3 hours because he once had a father and a brother, and a story that didn't end the way it should have. The door is worth answering. The stranger is sometimes the messenger you needed. And the cottage, the small, imperfect, slightly drafty cottage with the wobbling table, and the stone fireplace, and the ancient gas range, and the wooden desk now papered in crayon birds, the cottage was always going to end up exactly where it belonged. It just needed the long way around to get there.